properties, a lot of theorems that we looked at, and many of the questions that you have in the checkpoint and in the workbook will be matching, well, not matching, but identifying what properties mean. So here on the right, I have some options. Wider than half the length of the segment you're attempting to bisect, then the lines are perpendicular. 8, bisects the segment. The perpendicular from the point to the line, and 2 lines are parallel to each other. Let's match them with the things on the left. So first of all, the shortest distance between a point to a line is what? What is the shortest distance from a point, let me draw a picture, to a line? How did we know? What was the shortest distance from a point to a line? And we said, well, it's the perpendicular line between the point and the line. So that would be option E. Okay. The shortest distance between a point and a line is the perpendicular from the point to the line. Next, if 2 coplanar lines are perpendicular to the same line, then what? So let's take a look at what that looks like. So we have a line. Sorry, my lines are not real pretty. Let me start again. That's a little better. So we have a line, and we have 2 other lines that are perpendicular to it. So here's a line perpendicular to it. Here's a line perpendicular to it. What did we know about these 2 lines? I'll call them M and N. They're perpendicular to the same line. What did we know? We knew that they were parallel to each other. Notice if they're both perpendicular to that line, they end up being parallel to one another. So that is option F down here. Next, a transversal that's perpendicular to 2 parallel lines forms how many congruent angles? Okay, let's take a look at what that looks like. A transversal that's perpendicular to 2 parallel lines. So we have parallel lines. Let me draw a pair there. And we have a transversal going through them, and it's perpendicular to both of them. How many congruent angles are formed? Well, if it's perpendicular here, that's 90. It makes actually all of these 90, because when perpendicular lines intersect, it makes 4 90-degree angles. The same thing happens down here, making 4 90-degree angles. So we had 4 90-degree angles at each line. 4 and 4 gives us 8 congruent angles. So the answer there would be 8. Or option C. Next, a perpendicular bisector of a segment is both perpendicular and what? So just look at the name, perpendicular bisector. It does 2 things. It's perpendicular and it bisects right out of its name. So the perpendicular bisector of a segment is both perpendicular and what? It's both perpendicular and it bisects. So it is a bisects the segment, option D right here. Okay, so in perpendicular bisector, let's say this is my line segment here to here. It has to bisect, meaning go right down the middle, and it has to be perpendicular. Next, in constructing perpendicular bisector, if you're making one, you must open the compass how big? So remember, the first step for constructing a perpendicular bisector was to start with a line segment. You took your compass, so this is our compass here, has a pencil on one end, a point on the other. Remember, we needed it to go at least halfway, so that when we make our arc, we're going past half. And we make the arc on the other side, we're going past half so that they can meet in the middle. So when you open your compass to make that first one, it needs to be opened right here, wider than half the length of the segment. Because again, if you don't go at least halfway, you're not going to make it to the perpendicular bisector because it goes right down the middle of the segment. So it has to be bigger than half. And finally, if 2 intersecting lines form a linear pair of congruent angles, what do we know? Well, here it tells us we know that those lines are perpendicular. That's our only option left. But let's take a look at that a little closer. If 2 intersecting lines form a linear pair, what does that mean? A linear pair of congruent angles. So you have two lines that intersect. Notice we have a linear pair here, and here are two angles that make a line together. If they're also congruent, well, what equal number adds to be 180? We need two equal angles. Well, they would have to be 90 and 90. So we had a pair of congruent angles that made 180. That made them have to be 90 and 90. And so that makes these right angles. What do you call two lines that intersect at right angles? You call them perpendicular lines. So that forces the lines to be perpendicular, which is what option B, our matching part, was up here. Okay, so those you'll want to write down, or at least go through them a couple of times, because I promise you, you will see them. And here is a cleaned up version of the answers where we just match them straight across. So I just adjusted so you could see them cleaned up a little bit.